Narcissistic abuse victims sometimes get stuck in a toxic relationship because we can't deal with the idea of another change. It feels like a loss that's intolerable. Today, Tara and I talk about how to address endings and finding closure so that we don't forget that we count too. And the self-help tip is how to use letter writing to create the closure you need. Thank you for joining me on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience. Each week, I'll take a vulnerable look at the nitty-gritty details of narcissistic abuse, at the underlying dynamics that make these relationships so challenging. This is a listener-supported podcast, so thank you for becoming a sponsor for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. Now you don't need to wait a week to get your next podcast fix. Join Breaking Free from Narc Abuse at substack.com to get exclusive audio content for subscribers. To sign up, click the link in the show notes. The challenge I had in that toxic relationship when I came to leaving was not just ending the marriage. When was it okay to end? Was it enough reasons to end? But it was also knowing that when I ended it, I was losing a lot of other things. A lot of other things ended for me. Like I knew that my relationship with the people in that area probably was going to change because I would probably have to move. I knew that my connection with my ex's family would change, and I had some really great relationships that I valued. And I also knew that because he and I worked together, then there would be all this related work change. So I realized as I was parting ways with him that I was grieving, and that it was even the fear of the grief that kept me from making some of the decisions I should have made that probably were in my best interest.
I can really relate. It just felt like, I know for me, and I had a lot more or a lot different wrapped up in it because we also had small children. But I know for me, I just felt like I couldn't handle another big change in my life, which is so silly because looking back, I was pretty young. I was like 31 when that relationship ended. So it's like silly to look back and be like, oh, I couldn't handle another big change. But I'd gotten clean and made all these huge changes in my life when I was 23. And I just felt like, oh, I'm done. I'm done with big changes. Like I'm settled. This is what life's going to be like. And so I had a lot of grief wrapped up in feeling like I was going to be starting over again, which absolutely was going to be the case, but also just a whole life that I had wrapped up with this person. We had shared friends, our parents liked each other, our parents liked that we were married, this sense of family. I felt a lot of grief about losing that family connection to his as well. You know, the idea of raising your kids with the person you have them with, expectations around that too, and dreams like we were going to retire and travel the world with an RV, and we weren't going to do that anymore.
Right.
And it just was a lot wrapped up. And I felt like if I left, it would be unbearable, that I wouldn't get through it, that life would stop for me, that I would never recover. I had a lot of those thoughts in my head that really stopped me from making the choices that I did end up having to make. And none of those worries ended up being true at all.
You just gave me a flash. He and I had planned to do a year's worth of traveling around Mexico. It even gotten so far that he and I were making reservations in different locations, that we had sites that we wanted to see and that we planned to stay there for several weeks before we moved to the new site so we could really explore. And I hated making those cancellations because I knew that I had to let go of that. In fact, there were times that I'd actually say, if it doesn't get better, I need to leave, but I'm going to wait till we get through Christmas. Or if it doesn't get better, I need to leave, but I'm going to wait until this next visit. My friends are coming to visit down here, and I don't want to do it just before that. But I actually found myself delaying because I wanted to postpone the loss and the change that would bring with it. Because I found that so, like, I couldn't do it all. It was really hard, like this big loss. Yeah, I guess that's the best word. I just felt like so much was riding on us staying together that I would then postpone leaving because I didn't want to disrupt all that.
Yeah, I absolutely did the same thing. I had gone to work after maternity leave, and I thought too of, well, I can wait until, my salary is what it used to be. Again, just this idea of just delaying and postponing. Like, there's honestly never a good time to leave an unhealthy relationship. There isn't. But the excuses that I made and the excuses that you made really contributed to me and us just staying stuck, when we absolutely needed to leave. And I know looking back that I should have left much earlier than I did. But looking back too, I know that I learned some lessons that I think I needed to learn, that it's hard for me to admit that sometimes because they were extremely painful lessons. But I also know that I came away from that relationship knowing I'd really tried all that I could, and that there was literally nothing I could give anymore to that relationship. That if I had given any more, it would have meant the end of me, honestly, because I was at my last rope. There was nothing else I could give. And so I left at the best time for me. At the time, did it feel that way? No, it felt like I was like dragging myself away from a bomb site.
Right. Hoping it doesn't go off before you get out of it. But there's a great tension. And you're right. That is the tension. The tension is I want to make sure that I've done everything I need to do so that I give myself closure. So I can look at myself in the reflection and say, you did everything. You didn't there was not one stone that you didn't turn over. But I also, at the same time, you said there's never a good time to leave a relationship. I never heard that before. This is you saying it. I was like, yeah, exactly. I needed to hear that Kerry, this is always going to be messy. There is no good time. Just make sure you can live with yourself, that you feel that you've put in all the effort you need to so that it feels right to do that.
And I'm also reminded of something we hear a lot in 12-step programs where they talk about your bottom can be whatever you want it to be, whatever you choose it to be. And I think that's a very valuable point, because we can also hear that message of we need to try all that we can, to be able to look in the mirror. I do not want listeners to hear that and think, oh, I need to try some more.
Yes.
Like, we can choose to leave when it's just a little bad or extremely bad. I absolutely wish I had left so much earlier. I wish that I had left so much earlier, because the lessons that I had to learn were devastating for my self-esteem and feelings of self-worth. And the amount of therapy that I had to do after that relationship to recover was extreme. The amount of trauma that I went through in just a 7-month period was so extreme. And it really made it so difficult in entering into a future romantic relationship. And so our bottom can be whatever we choose it to be. It absolutely can. And so if you feel like I've done enough and I'm not willing to do any more, then that's the perfect time to leave a relationship.
Yeah, because I don't want to imply that either. I once did a skit because a friend of mine was struggling. Like, is this really abusive? Is it too abusive? When do I leave? And I once thought, like, if we had a glass of water and we poured in a little bit of sewer water, do you want to drink that? I mean, how bad is that? I don't want to drink that ever. To me, that's already like a non-negotiable. But I know that we end up asking ourselves that, like, well, it's really not that bad. Or the other thing we do, Tara, is we use other people's standards.
Yes.
Well, my mom put up with this, or my neighbor's going through something worse, or at least he's not hitting me. Or she's not, like, whatever. But I don't think we have to use other people's. Our standard is good enough. It's our standard.
Right.
Like that in itself, it's like, you're right. We can create our own bottom. I love that. I never heard of that before.
And that needs to be a mantra for us, that our decision to leave was the best decision for us as individuals, because I heard so many things like, well, you could just stay until the kids are grown, or marriages can survive anything, or things like that. And that messaging really could have meant that I had literally 16 plus more years with this person. I can't even imagine how bad that would be.
Right.
And, that's why we get to decide what our bottom is, what's enough for us.
Right. It's so hard, because part of what's happening is we're being asked to empty ourselves out. We're even being told that everything we do, we say, we're not showing up quite the right way. We're not doing it the right way. So it becomes really hard to sort this through. I had an analogy today. I'm going to actually make this video. I had a really great analogy that being in a narcissistically abusive relationship is like you have one weight piled onto you after another. You end up finding that you can't do things right that you've always done. Like, I heard that I can't do laundry right. I couldn't even put groceries away correctly in the refrigerator. So the person we're living with starts to, like, load up, and then they load us up with their emotional baggage. Like, you need to keep me happy. I want the house clean when I get home. I need to have a meal on the table. You need to keep the kids quiet, or whatever it is. It's all these different, that's another load that comes on. And before we know it, we're like carrying this massive load of other people's burdens. And then somebody says, and why are you not leaving earlier? Which you look at that and it's like another heavy weight in front of you. Like, and I'm supposed to pick up that load too. I can barely walk with the load that I have. So it becomes this struggle with how do we then not make ourselves like the only center, but realize that we're a part of the picture, and that taking care of ourselves needs to consider ourselves. Like, how much more can I do? Like you said, create your own bottom. What's reasonable to take on and not take on in this relationship? When is it okay to center myself at all in any way, like my needs versus the kids' needs versus the family's needs versus the narcissist's needs? It just becomes so challenging. It just is, it's hard to make a decision in the midst of that. So I struggled there for a long time. I couldn't see the way out because of that, of all of that. And then the intimidation that was going on. But it's hard because there's a lot of loss. And I knew that loss would come with this. And it made it for me even harder. And yeah.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point just in terms of trying to figure out in a realistic sense, what's our responsibility and what's not. And you and I have talked about in previous episodes, just that other people's feelings are not our responsibility. And when I was in that relationship, I could not have even grasped that. You mentioned keep the kids quiet. My ex put our daughter in her crib and then punched the wall above it. And it was at an age where, they were babies, our twins were babies. And of course literally their first year of their life, they just didn't really sleep. And it was an awful, excruciating time. And I felt extremely responsible as their mom that I needed to figure out how to keep them quiet, get them to go to sleep at a reasonable time, get them structured, because his reactions were so frightening, And I felt responsible of that, not only because, I'm their mom, I should know how to get these babies to go to sleep at a reasonable time, blah, blah, blah. But also just because it impacted me too. It's not like I wasn't exhausted, tired, stressed, and overwhelmed, but I was not punching walls. And I just did not have the ability to see that as not my responsibility at that time. I just didn't. I did everything that I could. I moved those babies into their own room, crib trained them. I did all of this stuff to try to get those babies to not make their dad react. But honestly, the way he was and how abusive he was, it didn't matter what I did. He was always going to be reactive. Yeah. And the short-term thinking that happens when we're in trauma bonds and abusive relationships is that we can't see it for what it is. We can't see that it's a pattern of this person is never okay. That the bar constantly moves. Once I got the kids to sleep, other things were going to set him off. There wasn't any predictability to it. All that I knew is that it was just going to be unpredictable and chaotic. And it wasn't until I was able to step away from it that I could start to see that.
Because you can't see it in the middle of that, can you? You can't see the fact that I did too. I kept thinking, if we fix this problem, it'll go away. We'll fix that problem, it'll go away. No, the problem was him, and he's not going away.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
He's the common denominator.
Yeah.
And that's hard to see.
But
right.
Yeah, it is hard to see. I literally thought, we'll get over this obstacle, things will smooth out. Oh no, we'll get over that obstacle. Oh, things will smooth out. But there was always another obstacle. Because people who have these narcissistic traits, they're like literally this cyclone. They're standing in the center of the eye, but we're living in the swirl around them. And there's always a new swirl. There's always new chaos, new drama that's happening.
And we feel that we have a degree of power and control over that person in the eye of the storm, but we really don't. Like, I thought I had a degree of power and control in that, if I can just get these babies to sleep at a reasonable time, then it'll be better. But I really didn't. It just was this, this sort of dangling carrot. That's really what it is. Each time it was a dangling carrot. And the thing that I just learned over time is that, healthy relationships that go through problems, they get better. They get better. Yeah. I never saw a degree of better in that relationship. And like Lisa, Sunny, and I talked about in a previous episode, it's not necessarily that it was that things were better in that relationship at times. Sometimes it was just an absence of abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. But you think though, okay, it's quiet. This is good. Right. We're on better footing. This is a better foundation.
Right. Right. But are we really?
No.
And that's why it's so valuable to really start to think about and evaluate that relationship a little differently.
So what have you learned? I know that you are now not that 20-something-year-old. What have you learned about just the changeability of life, the seasons of things, even the seasons of relationships? Where has that kind of taken you to help you not be so all or nothing or catastrophic about it? Because I know that's where I go. I tend to I like to see things black and white. I'm very literal that way. So it gets me kind of scared sometimes when I anticipate change.
Yeah, I think leaving that extremely unhealthy relationship really taught me that change is always going to be scary. There's always grief wrapped up in change, but it's always going to end up somehow being okay, you know? And that really comes down to me and my approach to it. But I have had to learn to accept that every kind of change comes with a degree of loss and sadness. You know, just leaving a job that you hated, you're still going to be sad. Leaving a relationship that made you feel annihilated, it's still going to be sad. There's always going to be some degree of sadness. And, you know, it's just sort of part of life. And as long as I embrace and am okay with processing whatever that feeling might be, whether it's sadness or anger or both, you know, that it's going to end up being okay. And
yeah, I remember years ago when I had the babies and I was holding them in my arms and I'm thinking, oh, this stage is so cute. I don't really ever want to lose this stage. It's going to be so hard to have them become a toddler. It's going to be so hard to have them go to school or so hard to have them leave the home. But what I found, though, is as much as every stage was super sweet, there was an equally sweetness to the next stage. So that it was just this bittersweet experience. There was a combination of letting go of what I knew and the beauty of that and the loveliness of it, but also embracing the unknowns that's coming and discovering the joy of the new stage. And I have to tell you, especially with my relationship with my kids, is that there's not been a stage that hasn't been as wonderful as the past stage. And that's helped me to remember, even when it comes to relationships, that things do come and go, but that doesn't mean there isn't equally sweet stuff coming just because I'm letting go something that's really maybe important to me.
It's interesting you brought that up. My neighbor across the street, she and I are the same age, but her children are significantly older. She started much, much younger in life. And, you know, I was asking her, I was like, do you remember this stage? What was that like for you? You know, it seems like it would be such a dream for my kids to already be driving and like living their own lives. And she was like, you know, some things are easier and some things are harder. It's just different. And that was a good reminder to me that that's sort of how different stages of life and different relationships are. Like some things are harder, some things are easier, but it's just going to be different, you know? And you got to sort of be okay with whatever it is in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Did your life change a lot when you left that toxic relationship like you thought it would?
Yeah.
I moved.
Everything.
Well, yeah, I moved internationally. I mean, I left Mexico, came back to the United States. I ended up on the floor of my son's apartment for a while. I mean, it was totally, I lost a lot of relationships. I had to essentially start over. So there was some real hard parts to it.
Yeah.
But there's also some really great parts to it too. I mean, I wondered if it was as dramatic for you as it was for me.
From the outside, it absolutely was extremely dramatic, and from the inside too. But I think the biggest lesson what I took away from it the most is that it really just made me a softer, gentler person overall. When I was in that relationship, I found that I was extremely judgmental and very condescending and kind of superior about it. And which is, I think it was the way I was sort of handling the abuse at the time and the situation of like, well, at least we're not as bad as them. Or, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing that. Like, I just was very gossipy and hyper focused on other people because that was a way that I could avoid looking at my own life. Honestly, I struggled a lot with jealousy. I struggled a lot with gossiping and being mean, honestly, relatively cruel. And that experience humbled me in a way that no other experience in my life has done that. It really just taught me that I had no fucking clue what was going on in my own life and that I had no business pretending that I knew all the answers or that I knew what other people should be doing. So for me, yes, outside, I mean, I became a single mother of young twins. I was dating, living in a house. I changed careers. I got a new business. I started a business. I got remarried. I had another baby. My life dramatically from the outside, but from the inside, the person I am today, I love myself so much more. I feel like I have so much more gentleness and kindness and patience than I would have ever had before. And that has been the biggest gift for me in that whole process is that I don't know if I would have gotten that had I not been smacked so hard in the face.
Yeah. I lost a lot too. I lost a lot of relationships that were important to me that may not ever be quite what they could have been because I moved out of the area and it's harder to do it long distance. But I also know I gained some things because that relationship was going to threaten the relationship I had with my sons. And I was able to not only get that back and recapture it, but have it be better than it ever has been. So that helps me to know that there's seasons to these things. And that just because I feel like some of these things maybe are too big, that I don't really want that loss, that I've learned to ride through them and know that there's sweetness everywhere if you look for it. Sometimes you have to look for it. Sometimes it's not, sometimes some of these things happen to us and we don't want them. But if we really slow down, we can see the blessing in the middle of it, that things are really bittersweet. There's often a bitterness as a sweetness to them at the same time.
Do you feel like you learned any sort of, or had any big personality shifts?
Oh yeah,
as
absolutely.
a result? Yeah. So what?
Yeah, my personality today is it'd be curious for me to ask my sons who've known me through the whole thing, but it's hard, and it's also hard for me because the loss of Brad sort of sits on top of the loss of that relationship. So both were so catastrophically impactful to me. But I'm not the person I was prior to Brad dying. She died, and she definitely died at the end of that relationship. It's like I died twice in that process. Yeah. And I continue. You know what? The other weird thing, Terry, is I continue to die. Is I catch pieces of me that are, because I have a legacy problem. I have my brokenness goes all the way back to birth. I was born into a very, very toxic home with that required me to submerge myself. So I'm still trying, in a way, be born. If you think about it, I'm trying to find me, the original me that was asked not to hold myself in abeyance for the sake of the system, the family system. So I feel like I'm constantly, that piece is the her that learned to survive those toxicity continues to die incrementally. But yeah, I'm braver. I know I can do things. I know that I'll come out okay. Before maybe I used to think it was more all or nothing. I won't survive this, or I'll be alone forever. And alone is like this, annihilated. Well, and interesting because I'm in this certification course for narcissistic abuse. And today, Dr. Ramani, who's been doing the training, talks about how when you grow up in a home where there's narcissistic system in place, the self that gets developed around an empty core. You're not really allowed to be a self because the self is in conflict with the needs of the family.
Right.
So that creates some sense of incredible isolation and loneliness, a fear, almost like an existential fear of being on your own because there's nothing inside, because you've been serving everyone and everything. So that is gone. There's no more an empty core. I've filled her up. I'm still filling her, but I filled her up. I think to me, that's been the biggest change, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And very relatable.
Yeah, so we can go in two directions and we can cut this piece out. Do you want to go ahead and do the announcement now, or do you want to jump into the self-help tip?
That would make sense.
Yeah, okay. All right. So that kind of leads us into us changing because we're facing a change. So Tara, I'm losing you, and I actually felt near tears a few minutes ago, and I'm feeling them again. But I'm also super happy for you. So tell us what you're about to do or what you're doing now and why you and I are saying goodbye here today. But
so my husband and I did some content together in December. I was kind of needing sort of a mental health break. This is tough content to live in and work with, and I was just needing to do something lighthearted. So my husband and I did a lighthearted little skit, and it's proceeded to take off. And now my husband, who's he's my buddy. I love hanging out with him, and we get to create this content together, and it's been so fun and it's easy to do, and we just get to laugh together, and it's been taking up so much of my time, and my time is already extremely limited. And so I'm kind of stepping back from my other tasks that have been involved, such as, breaking free from narcissistic abuse, which has a lot of, again, like we've been talking about, it's very bittersweet. I've loved working with you for this past year, and it's been about a year. I joined in January of 2023. It's been this amazing journey to work on this together, and it's been extremely amazing to work with you because you're so light. I love that about you. And I think that's the gift that a lot of us who heal from narcissistic abuse is that we get to be our light, fun selves. And that's been so enjoyable to work with you in that. And, it's just a change. which means it's sad, but it's not like a goodbye forever. Like Kerry and I are not in fights over this.
Right.
It was a really sad, it's just a shift, like we've been talking about today. And, so it doesn't mean goodbye, but it does mean,
well, your brand shifted and that's what happens. Sometimes our brand just makes a big shift and we're heading in a different direction. I'm super excited about this. I know that you and Brian love to work together. So it brings you guys together in a great new way. I also know it's a blessing that this is, as you said, it's fun to do. And now on top of it, it's something you get paid to do. That's fun. I mean, who doesn't want that for you?
Right.
So I'm super happy about that. Yeah. I know for us breaking free, I did have a year before you joined it. I already have new plans that people are experiencing, and that is that they're going to see a lot more of Lisa Sunny as a regular, and also Rosanna Faye at times will join in. And then I plan to do something different as well, and that is to interview special guests. So already I just interviewed Kate Anthony for one. Next week, people are going to get to hear Dr. Robin Stern talk about gaslighting. In March, I'm going to be bringing on Natalie Hoffman, who's going to talk about religious abuse and how the church grooms women to be abuse victims. So I'm looking forward and planning to invite some really amazing people here that we kind of talk about the various aspects of abuse, to hear their voices too. So as much as we're going to miss you, you added a lot. I know that you enriched this podcast. You took me in some directions that I might not have thought to take. And you challenged me in some ways that really made me more. And it's always a pleasure to work with you. One of the things I probably have never said out loud to people, but Tara, despite the age difference and that I'm a lot older than her, she's been my mentor off and on. And she's, you've helped shape my career where I'm at. And so I feel I owe you a lot. And I'm really, really grateful to you for that. So I'm excited. And I'm sad, but I also know you and I are friends, and that will remain so.
I think we're both crying.
Yeah. And so now we're supposed to head into the self-help tip, which I know you had a brilliant one. So why don't you so if you're thinking back to the narcissistically abusive relationship, if you know that there's some loss that you're having that you're struggling with, or maybe even finding closure, I love the suggestion that Tara had. So I'll let you take it away, Tara.
Yeah. So one thing that I did, and I've recommended to multiple clients that have also found it helpful, is for me, specifically when I was ending that relationship, I felt like there were still things that I needed to say, and that I was never going to get the response that I wanted if I said that to him. So what I did is I wrote a letter to my ex that I never sent. And I wrote down everything that I wish I would have said. I said it exactly as I would have liked to have said it. I spent some time going over, this is how I wish I would have said it. And this is how I would have liked to say it, and all of these things. And I really focused on my feelings as well as the impact of his behaviors on me as a person, how I felt about myself, how I felt about my future. I said everything I wish I would have said, and I never sent it. That's an important piece. The next step is I wrote a letter to myself from my ex, telling me the things that I wish he would have said. Because so often in these relationships, and specifically when I'm thinking of the one with my ex, is that there would be times he'd give me an apology, he would say blah, 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 but it was just never enough. This person was never going to truly give me what I needed, because it really wasn't for him to give, to be honest. I can't go to that toxic person expecting that toxic person to heal me. And that was for me. And so what I did is I wrote a letter as if it was coming from him to me, saying the things that I wish he would have said. And it sounds really cheesy. It really does. And it felt cheesy in the moment. But for me, it was so amazing to just have written on paper the things that I wished he would have said. And it really helped me sort of shut the door on that there was nothing left to say. There was nothing left for him to say either. That meant I didn't have to feel like I needed to constantly reach out to him or phrase it this way or try this communication style, that I could really just be done. And for me, that helped close that door for myself to be able to start to move on.
I love that. I've never done that latter part. I may do it because That would be wonderful. I'd like to get some of that. So thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for this past year. And this is not for Tara, though. Tara is going to join me over in the podcast extra. And we're going to be talking about how to create your own bottom, because I think that's a fascinating idea. So if you'd like to know more about what is that, what do we mean by that, please join us by becoming a subscriber. But thank you, Tara. I love and going to miss you so much.
I know.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Find me at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. And whether you're consider leaving, or have left a narcissistic relationship, find community support at my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can learn about this resource as well as others at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.